Hello, and welcome to Daniel's Inferno. My name is Daniel. Thank you for joining me this evening. Before we get started, if you have a moment, please like, subscribe, share, and join the conversation below because I'd love to hear from you. So, today's video, more news involving the US-Iran conflict that is escalating, and more news regarding Qasem Soleimani. So, as you can see on my screen here, because we're going to dive right on into it today, a stampede in Iran had 50 people trampled. This, as you can see, is a funeral procession in what is supposed to be the hometown of Qasem Soleimani, of Kerman. This is due to how popular and how many people are trying to get to the funeral, how many people have taken to the streets. These crowds have been galvanized. There is no longer a divide among the people of Iran like there was. There were moderate people of Iran, and what has happened now with the killing of Soleimani is there's a galvanization of the Iranian people. And I think that the fact that 50 Iranians got trampled on the way to the funeral procession of this individual, force of habit to say gentleman, he's not a gentleman at all. This burial is the last in a series of funeral events that have brought millions onto the streets in Iran. So, quick comment. When Mike Pompeo, the foreign minister, U.S. Secretary for Foreign Affairs, whatever, when he said that people were, quote, dancing on the streets of Iran and Iraq, there were people in the streets, millions of people on the streets in Iran and Iraq. But they weren't dancing, they were mourning. He totally buried the lead and miscommunicated the actual emotion that was going on there. The heads of the Quds Force was tasked with defending and projecting Iranian interests abroad. We've talked about this before. He was hailed as a hero by many in his home country. So what happened in Kerman today? In the southeastern Iranian city, at the start of a funeral procession that had drawn vast numbers of people on Tuesday morning ahead of the planned burial. Excuse me. I'm getting a bit sick. Eyewitnesses told BBC Persian that streets were not wide enough to hold the number of people, and with other roads closed off, there were issues. The coroner quoted on Iran's ISNA news agency that the death toll was at 50, and those injured numbering more than 200. As you can see here, people with shirts with Qasem's face and posters and pictures of the Ayatollah. There was a renewed threat for revenge by top Iranian officials. The martyr Qasem Soleimani is more powerful now that he is dead. Let me just say that's ridiculous. He is not more powerful now that he is dead at all. He's dead. He's got no power. He in the ground. The guards were set up to defend Iran's Islamic system and are a major political and military force. Mourners in Kerman chanted death to America and death to Trump. In Iraq, thousands of people took to the streets in the southern city of Basra for the funeral procession of Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, head of the Kataib Hezbollah militia group who was killed alongside Soleimani. Muhandis was the Iranian top advisor and ally in Iraq and a powerful leader among Iraq Shia militias. This was pretty big, in my opinion. The U.S. reportedly denied a visa for Iran's foreign minister, Javad Zarif, to visit the UN in New York this week, a move that appears to breach an agreement guaranteeing foreign officials access to UN headquarters. That before today, like before this evening, what's happened, and we'll get into that shortly, I would have said that the banning or stopping of his visa to visit the UN was wrong, because I am familiar with the law that guarantees the rights of all foreign diplomats to have access to the UN, to make complaints, and to state their case. Now, I think that we don't want to overstate the power of the UN, because it doesn't really have that much power, but symbolically, it shouldn't have been done. However, what has happened this evening makes the move justified. Now, whether or not the banning or stopping of the visa had anything to do with this happening, I'm not sure. We do know that the death of Qassam is the primary motivator, but as you can see on our screen, U.S. troops were targeted with ballistic missiles. At least 2 bases that Iran has claimed responsibility for. They carried out a ballistic missile attack on air bases housing U.S. forces in Iraq, as well as Allied forces in the region. I believe it was Australia and UK troops that were also on the bases. More than a dozen missiles launched from Iran struck 2 air bases in Erbil and Al-Assad west of Baghdad. It is unclear if there have been any casualties. The initial response from Washington has been muted. Trump tweeted that all was well and said casualties and damage were being assessed. Now, I don't think saying all is well is the right way to put it. I do understand he's trying to ease the fears of people and ease the fears of the nation, and I think that's big of him, and that's his job, obviously. However, when missiles are launched at air bases in foreign territory, or at military bases in foreign territory that house your troops and troops of your allies, I would not say all is well. That is not the proper response, especially when we don't know the damage or if there have been casualties. It is I believe, if there are casualties, Trump will unleash the shitstorm on them. He will open up double barrels and unleash. That is my prediction, if there are any casualties. And the fact that there were Australian and UK troops, that's a perfect way to galvanize other people to get involved. It was just the US versus Iran, which we all know how that would have went anyway. But if there's a coalition, that's even worse for them. 2 Iraqi bases housing U.S. and coalition troops were targeted around 2 a.m. local time, 10 p.m. GMT, just hours after the burial of Soleimani. The airbase Al-Assad, located in Anbar province west of Iraq, was hit by at least 6 missiles. Ayatollah Khamenei said the attack was a slap in the face for the U.S. When it comes to confrontation, military action of this kind is not enough. What is important is that the corrupt presence of the U.S. should come to an end, he said. Is this an end of the escalation? This is the most direct assault by Iran on the U.S. since the seizing of the U.S. embassy in Tehran in 1979. And if you're not familiar, that is when the Islamic Revolution happened in Iran and the U.S. was forced on out. I believe it was around then. Iran's Revolutionary Guards said the attack was in retaliation for the death of Soleimani, that was obvious. We are warning all American allies who gave their bases to its terrorist army that any territory that is the starting point of aggressive acts against Iran will be targeted. The chief of staff of Iran's regular military said the missile attack showed just a small part of the capabilities of the Iranian armed forces. But Iranian foreign minister issued a statement on Twitter claiming the attack was self-defense and denied seeking to escalate the situation into war. Iran took and conducted proportionate measures in self-defense under Article 51 of UN Charter, targeting base from which cowardly armed attack against our citizens and senior officials were launched. We do not seek escalation of war, but will defend ourselves against any aggression. Well, Javed Zarif, this is definitely an escalation. The BBC's Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, in Baghdad, says the tweets appear to suggest that Iran wishes to draw a line under its retaliation for the assassination of Soleimani, and it's putting the onus on the U.S. as to whether the situation escalates. A modest response. Given the significance and the passions that is killing aroused, Iran's military strike against U.S. bases in Iraq was a modest response. What? The attack was clearly timed to cause as few casualties as possible, but the U.S. and Iran, for all their rhetoric, do not want a wider conflict, so maybe a line can be drawn under this matter for now. Is this the end of retaliation? But it is hard to see Iranian policy changing. It is presumably still going to try and secure its regional goals, not least the departure of U.S. forces. The killing has weakened the U.S. position there, but it was rocket attacks from Iranian proxies, local Shia militia, against U.S. bases that formed the prelude to this recent crisis. That's something we need to remember, that this was started by rocket attacks by local Shia militias in Iraq that caused the whole conflict in the first place. And it's really hard to believe that Iran didn't have any knowledge or any hand to play in that attack by these militias. It's very hard to believe that. I just want to show you guys something I found a little sloppy on the part of the Guardian here. If you look, this is the only paper that has actually spelled Soleimani's name with a U. So unless every other article I've read about Qassam has been wrong, the Guardian has a very silly mistake here. A very Bush-like mistake. I just wanted to show you that. I don't want to show the video of what's apparently the rocket attacks. This is the last thing. Obviously, we're going to go through the Twitter reaction. What's going on in Twitter? So firstly, there were two hashtags going. The first was all is well. The second is all is not well. Ironically, all is not well had more tweets and more buzz than all is well. Now, that's not so surprising because we already know that the leftist presence on social media is very large, especially on somewhere like Twitter. But I have seen an increase or a surge in Republican or conservative support via social media to conservative officials and conservative pundits. So I'm surprised that I didn't see that surge in this situation when the rhetoric we've been hearing from the Republican side of the argument has been more of a support for the actions taken by Trump. Now, a lot of people are really all over the place about this, and honestly, I don't have time for all of this sensationalism. I want to know what's going on. I want the actual information. We don't have much information yet, and this happened a few hours after the burial of Soleimani. And that was, I read that article, I believe, at 2 o'clock today. And so if it was a few hours after, that would be about 5 o'clock my time, which is close to, depending on where you are in the U.S., it's anywhere between like 2 and 6 o'clock. So this has happened a while ago. So the fact that we don't know yet any casualties or any damage, that they're still assessing it, is telling to me. I could be very wrong. Please tell me, let me know what you think. But I truly believe the reason we haven't heard much yet is because the top brass in the Pentagon are making a plan. And that's because I believe there were casualties on these bases. And if that's the case, like I said, there will either be a coalition or Trump will just open up double barrels and fire on them. And that's not a place you want to be. Trump as a citizen is someone that you could argue with, you could have a disagreement with, and not be too worried about it. Trump as a president? No. No, no. That's not a place I want to be, on his bad side while he's the president of the United States. And not just because he's the president, but because he's him. And I'm a Trump supporter. I'm not slagging him. Just saying, I do believe if there are casualties, this is going to escalate even further. Thank you all for watching. Have a wonderful morning. I'm Daniel's Inferno.